In my last video, I brought in game music analysis YouTuber 8-Bit Music Theory and game composer Garret Williamson to discuss the connections between the Beatles and video game music. In this second part of that discussion, we're going to be discussing something that I deemed a little bit too dangerous for that first video, our Beatles opinions. As I sit here, literally the night before I go on stage to perform all 200-something Beatles songs, it occurs to me that when you've thought about the band as much as the group of us has, you wind up with some pretty out-there opinions about them. So a fair warning. This is a video for the real Beatles heads out there, and the takes you are about to witness are not for the faint of heart. Proceed with caution. And as always, if you like this sort of thing, let me know. Like the video, leave a comment, subscribe, you know the drill. So, until next time, enjoy. Funny aside, it's actually kind of a interesting time that we're talking about this, because this is kind of a maybe not like a huge year for the Beatles, but kind of a big year, because there's a bunch of stuff coming out, like the Peter Jackson documentary at the end of the end of the year is going to be pretty big.
I'm excited about that.
And there was also just a thing released on Hulu. I don't know if it was just like a day ago, like the Rick Rubin, Paul McCartney thing.
I didn't even know about it till yesterday. I turned on Hulu. I was like, okay, well, that's become my night now. I'm just going to be watching this.
That's so funny. Yeah, I watched like all of it yesterday. But
man, I gotta check this out.
I was absolutely losing it at this story that Paul told in the beginning, where he was like, "Oh yeah, me and George, we went to a music shop, and like, the guy behind the counter was like a jazz guy, right? He was playing this chord, and we're like, oh, what's that chord? And like he plays like, I'm pretty sure it was I don't know if you can hear that. It's a
I think it's that sharp 9 chord,
it's
right?
an F7 sharp 9. But then like immediately after that, Paul is like, yeah, it's some kind of F chord. To this day, I don't know what it is. It's like, oh my god, I feel like such a nerd that like as soon as he played it I knew what it was, but like, he's like, oh man. But then he demonstrates like how he used it like perfectly in Michelle. Like he used that it's like a, but like every single like transcription I've ever heard of that song calls that like a B flat minor 7 chord, I think, but it's not. It's a sharp 9 chord.
Yeah, it's a sharp 9.
Yeah, but I never knew that. But like that story was just like, oh my god. Like,
oh man.
How can you not love this guy?
Well, that first episode also reminded me there was one big takeaway that I had from that I never thought about before, which was when he was talking about how like back in the 60s, he was like, there wasn't some easy way to just record our ideas if we had one.
Right.
So he was like, basically, we would sit there and we would just have to remember whatever our idea was, so we could like put it down somewhere the next morning or something. Yeah. So he was like, I don't think that. He was like, I'm not even sure if our songs became memorable because we wanted them to. They were memorable because they had to be. We had to remember them for the next. And I was like, that's incredible. Like I never thought about that.
Never would have thought about that in my life. That was insane to me. All right, so. It wouldn't really be a real Beatles discussion video without going through some of the obvious Beatles questions. So I gotta ask you guys. First of all, your favorite Beatle and why?
Paul McCartney.
Okay.
Paul McCartney for sure. And again, this was something I even had a sort of a revelation with last night, because when watching just the first episode of that little documentary thing, he was talking about how he just the way he grew up and how John Lennon grew up and how they were from totally different points of views, but that's what made their songs together so great.
Oh yeah.
But I think part of the reason that I love Paul McCartney's stuff is because he's generally more of the optimist in terms of the songwriting, and I think I resonate a little bit more with that.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'd say Paul McCartney. Yeah. He's my favorite.
Cool.
I think I'd go with George because, first of all, he's got some of the greatest Beatles songs. Like, I think Paul and John are better songwriters, like in general, but the ratio of bangers to not bangers on George's stuff, just because he has so fewer songs and he has so many like classics, like. Long is just like my favorite piece of music ever. It's beautiful. And then obviously like Something and the bangers. But I feel like he has a sense of humor to his music that I really resonate with.
Oh, for sure.
Like What's that song? When I get near you. What's that one called?
I want to tell you. I want to tell you.
I want to tell you.
Yeah.
That's like one of my favorite songs. Just like, I don't know why.
What is that? That's
I feel like musically there's a sense of humor with like this weird hang on these weird diminished chords for like way too long that you're like, how is this a pop song? Like, why are you just sitting on a diminished chord? And then also lyrically too. I don't know. He seemed like he had a really a sense of I mean, they all did. The whole band had a great sense of humor, and it seemed like they didn't take themselves that seriously when they were writing music, which is something that I really appreciate.
I'm probably like I vacillate between John and George all the time for different reasons. Like I think a lot of John's songs are really like psychologically fascinating. Like the lyrics are like sometimes really wild. I have like a soft spot for his kind of like jealous guy songs where he's because sometimes they can be just like so like venomous and like angry, and it's like the characters that he's coming up with singing these songs are like just like messes of psychological problems. But like that's it's fascinating. Like a song like on A Hard Day's Night, You Can't Do That, where you have like this like it has this like weird manic like kind of energy to it with there's so many like I'm pretty sure like he's singing like the sharp 9 on a D7 chord at one point, and it's like that's like when it's one thing to put that chord in the voice, like put a sharp 9 in the voicing, right? But it's another thing to be singing that in the melody. You know, like that stands out. Like that's like really so like that whole song just like sounds so angry and like so like that whole thing just is always really interesting to me. But at the same time, like I feel like George is like the most relatable Beatle, because you know he's the entire time through his career he's in the shadows, and then he slowly develops on his own. You know, he doesn't really have a support network, and into this incredible songwriter. And I do think that the best solo Beatles thing after the Beatles broke up is All Things Must Pass. Like I think that album is unbelievable. And like there's a lot of stuff in his later work that I really like too, which I hadn't heard until recently, but I started just like out of curiosity listening to some of his like pre-1980s albums, because he did some stuff with like Jeff Lynne that sounds a little bit too much like Jeff Lynne for my taste. But before that, like he has some really, really pretty songs on one album in particular. It's just George Harrison is the title of the album. It's from 1979. He wrote a sequel to Here Comes the Sun called Here Comes the Moon.
No way.
I haven't heard this record.
No, he actually did, and it's a completely different song, but it's really pretty. So yeah, I really like it's between them, and of course I love Paul, and you know I got to give a shout out to Ringo, because
poor Ringo, man.
Ringo, like he never gets picked as someone's favorite Beatle, but like, man, I feel like even people that should know better don't give him the credit that he deserves, because I feel like the sound of his particular drum sound was so fat and so like heavy that it really propels those early records, especially like if you have ever heard like some of the stuff when they were with Pete Best, like some of the demos, I think like the Decca demo that they did, it's like it just doesn't drive, you know, it's not the same thing. But then you hear Ringo and it's like nobody was really playing as heavily as like Ringo was playing in that period. So he was essential to the sound, really important, but he's nobody's favorite. Like,
well, man, no, I mean, you know, I come from a drummer background, so it's like there's a lot, like Tomorrow Never Knows is got to be one of the and I feel like that almost created a whole. It did create like a whole new genre in and of itself. It's like to some extent, I listen to that, I'm like, man, somebody could play this now, and it's still cool. Like, it's still totally, you know.
It's so cool. Yeah.
So shout outs to Ringo for his drum lines, because they are a huge part of those songs. But poor guy, I don't think he did he ever write a single Beatles song? I don't think he technically did.
He wrote
did he?
Don't Pass Me
Octopus's Garden was
Octopus's Garden, Don't Pass Me By.
Okay.
I think those are the two, maybe.
Yeah.
Two out of Lord knows how many. Poor guy.
Yeah, I mean, you know, some people just they decide like, I'm not a songwriter, you know, it's not really for me. But
yeah, I mean, especially if you're like, props to George for trying to compete with Paul and John. You know?
Oh yeah, it's so funny to me. There was like a story that he had told, like, well, if John and Paul can do it, it must not be that hard, right? Because they were just friends, you know, like they were just a couple of like kids that grew up in a band. So like he was to him, it's like they're just, you know, his friends Paul and John who are out writing songs. Right? It's like they can do it. Why can't I do it? Like, you know, it's so funny when you think of it from that perspective, though, because of course we always think of them as just like these legendary figures. But
you know. Right, yeah, totally.
Let's pivot to your favorite album.
I've got a not controversial one, but probably a rare pick. Okay. With the Beatles.
Ooh,
no way!
I respect that so much, my man.
I feel like those songs are so ahead of their time.
Oh, they are,
and they still have that early rock and roll energy that, like, personally, I just can't get enough of. I love that that style, that feel. And so then, like, taking that, like, just like super raw, aggressive.
Oh yeah.
Rock energy, and then using that in such interesting. They were using such interesting songwriting techniques, and like just starting. I don't know. There's
a lot of great stuff on that album. I think I always end up saying this of like every like kind of underrated album. No, but the John songs on it are really, really good. like there's some really wild stuff in there. Like what is the song? It's All I've Got to Do. It starts with this like augmented chord, like the.
Totally.
It's like Could you imagine like hearing that in a pop song like back in the day? Like, what was that, right? But that's like the vibe of that song is great. I really love Not a Second Time. That song.
Not a Second Time is so good.
It's so good, right?
And like that, and the phrasing on this album is so weird. Where like Not a Second Time is I think like a 7-bar verse.
Yeah.
And then it somehow flows well, and It Won't Be Long has like that weird 6-bar thing or 3-bar, however you want to count it out.
Yeah, you know what?
Every night.
Yeah. Hans Zimmer, so I watched at one point I had the Masterclass subscription. I watched through the entire Masterclass of Hans Zimmer's.
Okay.
And he mentioned that same thing from the beat. Now I think it was yesterday that he was talking about, but he was like, it's like a 7-bar verse or something, and he's like, but you never notice that because they do it so brilliantly. It's such a weird. It's off. It shouldn't make any sense, but it does.
Yeah.
And it's brilliant.
So genius.
Yeah. I would probably have to. I feel like this might even be slightly controversial, but I would probably say the White Album.
Okay. I've been seeing a lot more White Album love lately. You know, like
really. Okay.
I'm not super plugged into the wider world of the Beatles fans, but like what I do see, lately I've been kind of seeing a little bit more love for the White Album, and maybe it's because they just released fairly recently this box set with a bunch of like outtakes from the White Album sessions and like demos and stuff. And it's all great.
Okay.
It's all great stuff, of course. But like it's making people kind of like go back and re-listen to the White Album and like, oh yeah, like it's, you know, you can't
I feel
go
like
wrong.
that album has the best and the worst Beatles songs on it. You know,
I would honestly agree, because that was going to be my other probably controversial take. Is I tend to I'm a more critical Beatles fan where I utterly adore them, but you know they did have some pretty crappy songs over the course of their career.
Yeah, you're gonna swing and miss every now and then, you know.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's like when, no, exactly. If you're gonna be that brilliant, there's got to be at least one wrong one in there, right?
Well, that experimental too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
of course.
Yeah, incredibly. But yeah, no, I think there are more songs off of the White Album that I like than probably any other record that they did. Okay. Which is just, it is a little, I've talked with so many people about this, and most people are just like, really? That's your favorite one? Like, that's usually the response I get. So, but, you know, just between, I mean, the funny thing is, like, they even fully admitted themselves that, like, Rocky Raccoon was, like, a complete filler track. Like, I don't even think they gave a crap about that song. But there's that freaking and I love that. Till I die, I will love that line. So
of course.
But overall I'd say White Album's probably my favorite. I mean, I think just based on Blackbird and Martha My Dear being on it, I think that warrants it's because Blackbird is one of my all-time favorite songs. So
Yeah, of course.
Martha My Dear is underrated too. That doesn't like Blackbird. Yeah. Everyone loves Blackbird, but Martha My Dear, you don't hear as many people talk about. That's a great tune.
It's a great tune.
Our piano player in our Beatles gig always complains about that song because he's just like, every year I mess this up.
It's all over the place. Yeah. It's all over the place.
And the funny thing to me is like I seem to remember like reading a Paul McCartney interview sometime where he's like, oh yeah, I wrote that song when I was like 14, just kind of like messing around on the piano. It's not that hard, it's kind of the kind of song you write when you're just like,
screw you, Paul.
Like, come on, give me a break. It's an F7 sharp 9 chord. How do you not know that? So I have a lot of respect for you guys for not taking the trendy thing and saying Revolver is your favorite Beatles album, because that's the trendy thing, is to say Revolver is your favorite. Which, I mean,
not Sgt. Pepper.
It's a great. Well, Sgt. Pepper used to be the one because it is the best, but then people were like, oh, I can't say I like Sgt. Pepper. Sgt. Pepper is the one everybody said. I gotta say something different, but so I'm gonna say Revolver. Look,
this sounds.
Revolver's great. Like, I got no problem with Revolver, but.
Sounds like the Majora's Mask versus Ocarina of Time discussion.
Very similar. I always say, and I'm partially joking when I say this, but if somebody asked me to defend it as like actually real, I think I could make a compelling case. I always say Beatles for Sale is my favorite Beatles album.
No way!
Because and again, like partially a joke, right? Because obviously, like to any normal person, that's like their most completely unsuspecting whatever album. But like again, the John songs on it are great. Like all of them are great. It has like my least favorite Beatles song, probably Mr. Moonlight.
Bro.
Well, I'll say this about Mr. Moonlight. The intro to Mr. Moonlight is amazing. It's just that John just screaming Mr. Moonlight. That is cool. But the song just is like 2 minutes too long.
Very dated.
If it were 2 minutes shorter, just one less repeat after that organ solo, we'd be okay. But it just keeps on going. It's like, all right, I'm ready to move on to. I don't want to spoil the party or whatever.
Well, I think that song is so cool is when he's going 1, 2, 3, 4, and the night you don't come my way.
Oh yeah,
such a weird syncopation on the melody.
That's true. That is a weird.
I don't know
phrase.
why that just thrills me.
Okay.
It cracks me up.
Definitely.
It cracks me up that you're like, that song is 2 minutes too long. I was like, wait, how long is it again? It's like 2.5 minutes.
Yeah, we get it, Mr. Moonlight. All right, wrap
it up. Your least favorite Beatles song?
It's tough for me to say because. Unfortunately, again, it's like that's why I say I'm such a critical Beatles fan, because there are a handful of songs that I really don't like that they did.
Well, let's hear it. So, I want to hear your thoughts on this.
Oh gosh,
as a critical Beatles fan, I want to know.
Yeah, well, here's the reality from me personally. I never was much of a Beatlemania guy. I just most of those songs, with a few exceptions, I never could get into. They just bugged me. I think the reality, and again, it's totally personal preference, because a lot of it comes from you can hear where it's kind of coming out of 50s rock and roll. And admittedly, I really don't like 50s rock and roll. I just that's so I think that's largely why I can't do a lot of their earlier work. But there were songs. Now, granted, now I'm basically saying the exact opposite of what you asked. There were songs from that era. I mean, I love Love Me Do. I freaking love that track. I love It Won't Be Long. I think what drives me crazy is it's just the fact that you could hear them really learn it, and I appreciate the earlier records for this though, because it shows their growth. But I can really hear them like learning over the course of their records. Okay, maybe we should have our damn guitar in tune. Like that sounds like a plan.
Oh man, so that's funny you say that. The intro to what is it? Roll Over Beethoven. Where like I love that track, but like George's like intro to it like is very clunky, but it's like it's like charmingly clunky in a way, you know. Like actually that was something that Paul even brought up in that Hulu thing where he was listening to his like kind of like lead playing on Another Girl from Help, and like at the end of that there's like a couple of missed notes there, a little flubs it a little bit, and he was like, well, you know, but it kind of makes it, you know, familiar, you know. It's like it's a little innocent, you know.
Right.
It's like, but like that does add to it, I feel like, you know, especially nowadays, because like this is just like a pet peeve of mine in the just kind of like world of social media, like music, where everybody is just like killing themselves to get perfect takes, or you know, like just good. Like I do these cover videos where if I look through the amount of takes I've done, it's like filling up a whole terabyte hard drive of the same like, you know, thing, just because like there was one little thing in there that annoyed me. Totally. I was like, oh, I got to do the whole thing over, right?
Yep.
But
there's something to be said for trying to crank out an album every year, because you don't have time to care about that stuff.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
It's just like, all right, good enough. Let's move along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then those like mistakes get kind of immortalized, and like you don't hear them as mistakes anymore. They just sound like
they're part of the
song, you know.
And you know, and the other thing though is that those earlier records were definitely in a time where it was more like you were selling albums to sell a tour, right? It was like,
that's true.
So much of it was about like actually touring. So when you know, like Sgt. Pepper was so important, and I mean, you know, albums leading up to it were also very important in the same way, but I think that album a lot of people obviously go back to because it pretty much solidified the album as its own art form, right? So it's like a lot of stuff before that, you know, I'm sure they were doing it in one take and they're just like, it's the song, we don't have time, it's, you know, who cares, you know, people see us live, yada yada.
Sure.
So but no, and I do agree though, you know, like I criticize, you know, the guitars being out of tune and stuff, because that does kind of drive my ear crazy.
Sure.
But I have gotten very this will be me going music isn't like it used to be, where I have gotten very annoyed with how perfected things have gotten in this day and age, and that's something I really, really appreciate about these older records, is that you hear it's people playing the songs, you know, on instruments in the room together, and it makes a total difference. In a great way.
So I feel like the energy levels, even like the energy levels in it, override the like little mistakes they make, because you can just like feel the energy like emanating off of those recordings in a really big way. I think ultimately it's hard for me to be able to actually say what my least favorite song is, you know, but I guess I'll generalize and just say, generally speaking, I'm not a huge fan of their earlier work. Sure.
So but you know, that like I was also saying earlier, they had plenty of stupid songs off of you know, records that I would say I prefer more, you know, so
I think it's easy to say like, oh, my least favorite Beatles song is Wild Honey Pie, you know,
right?
It's like, anybody could say that. I feel like that's cheating almost.
I was gonna say I have a least favorite that's like, of course, and then I have a controversial least favorite as well.
Okay.
I love controversy.
Which I'll give the easy one first.
The easy one first.
Bungalow Bill. I skip every time.
Doesn't do anything for
you. My least favorite good Beatles song is "Can't Buy Me Love."
Ooh.
I don't love that one either.
I don't know why.
Bold choice.
I don't know what it is.
You know, it's never been my favorite either.
That's like, I feel like that song is so much more popular than it should be. Like it's up there. People think of that song as one of the probably first dozen Beatles songs that you think of. But I'm like, it's so much worse than like the whole rest of that album. You know, even like the night before or something. It's still just like a bluesy dancing number. It's so much more interesting.
Feels a little better. Yeah.
And that song is a prime example of a guitar out of tune. That one drives me crazy.
There's a couple of little weird recording things in that. The guitar solo sounds like it's double tracked, but it's actually not double tracked. It's just like the tape from the first take was like somehow leaked in there or something. I don't know the specifics of it, but it sounds like it's double tracked, but it's actually 2 different takes where one of them is just like kind of like ghosting in there a little bit.
That is weird.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird things like that in So I'm not sure like if like I already feel like Mr. Moonlight I guess is kind of like my go-to, and again like I don't really hate Mr. Moonlight. It's just, you know, out of like all of their stuff, that one's probably like usually a skip for me. After I hear John do the intro, I'm like, all right, you nailed it. I'm out.
It's all downhill from
there. I feel like the Beatles catalog, out of like any real like popular music act, is like one of the few where really every single album has something of value that's like really, really like good on it to get from it. Like you definitely can't say that about a lot of bands, and partially it's because the Beatles quit while they were ahead, you know, like they recorded Abbey Road, which, you know, a lot of people would say is like their favorite Beatles album, certainly like a crazy artistic statement, and then then we're done, right? So their entire like
on top.
their entire career is just like crystallized as this like perfect thing, whereas you have like other bands in that era like the Who, which I really love the Who, and they kept going like long after a lot of the steam had kind of fallen off, and they turned into like a totally different band in the 80s, and like they're still touring now even, right? And so like you have this kind of like the Beatles are always going to be of the 60s and nothing else. Like totally. even though like Paul and Ringo are still alive and they're still doing stuff, like the Beatles as the Beatles are like crystallized in time as this one particular thing.
Absolutely.
Whereas like and that's one of the things that makes it so fascinating to dig into, because it's almost like you're watching, not only just listening to albums chronologically, but you're kind of experiencing a narrative, like with a beginning, middle, and end, and like with all of the different pieces. And like the fascinating thing about the Beatles is like they were so big that we pretty much know everything about them, right? Like there's if you wanted to find out like what time Mr. Moonlight's overdubs were recorded, you can find out. Like that's a Google search away.
You're not wrong.
It's not even hard to figure that out, right? You really can learn everything that you could possibly know about the band, which just kind of improves your or I guess enhances your experience of listening to them in a way that you can't really say about a lot of other acts.
That's such a good point. I never thought of that, but I was gonna say like each album is so distinct from one another. They all do something totally different, and it's so well cataloged. Like what they did different and why and like when and
it's crazy because it was all. Yeah, it was all within like 6 to 7 years. Like they literally, it was like, you know, most people, it's like they evolve from one album to another over the course of at least 2 to 3 years.
Right.
It's like,
they're
you know, it's like something like Rubber Soul Revolver was literally barely a year, and it's like a totally different thing. It's remarkable. Yeah. It's crazy how much they were able to just artistically evolve in the short amount of time they had.
Yeah.
So,
man.
Yeah.
I hope that if anybody's listening to this that's like not, you know, a Beatles fan is listening to this and being like, wow, you know, these guys really care about this. Maybe what is up with this?
The more you dive into the Beatles music and history and the personalities, like you get what you get back is always worth what you put in. You know?
Yeah,
for sure.
Like for me, going through and listening to every single Beatles song and familiarizing myself, reading all of Alan Pollack's analyses. It's like you learn something new every time. It's not just like, you know, sitting through it.